Is justice just respect for everyone's freedom? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. So we're in the middle of a playlist on justice. We've looked at Plato, Aristotle, Jeremy Bentham. Today we're going to look at Immanuel Kant. Now, before we discuss Kant's theory of justice, you kind of have to start off with his understanding of his two-world type theory. And that is that there is a noumenal and a phenomenal world. The noumenal world is the world as it really is, and the phenomenal world is the world as you perceive it. So the noumenal world, right, the world as it really exists outside of your mind. The phenomenal world, as you get sense perceptions, as the world acts on you, your mind sort of organizes all the perceptions that you get, and it does so with certain regularities, like certain categories, like space, time, causality. It organizes it into these different categories that we're not sure exist in the noumenal world, actually. They definitely exist in the phenomenal world, in the world as you experience it, but that's only because your mind is actually categorizing these sense experiences into those categories. Is that the way that things are in the noumenal world? I don't know. So we don't actually know the way that the world is in the noumenal world. We don't know the actual way the world is. We only know the phenomenal world. We know the way as it appears to us. Now, in the phenomenal world, in the world as we experience it, everything is determined. Everything follows along, this deterministic scientific laws. Things happen in a particular way and they can't happen otherwise. So can there be such a thing as free will? Well, Kant says no, not according to the way the phenomenal world, the way that things appear. But in the noumenal world are things like that. We don't know. In the noumenal world, it could be the case that there would be free will. All we know is the way that our minds have organized things, and our minds have organized things into these nice little categories. Now, in order for us to engage in morality, in order for us to have moral lives, Kant says we have to have free will. It's the case that if we were just following a long deterministic path, then we couldn't help but do what we do. So would it be our fault if, let's say, we committed a murder? No, we would deterministically commit murders. Instead, it's only going to be our fault if we commit murder if we have the free will ability to commit murder or not to commit murder. So in order for us to have some kind of moral responsibility, we have to have free will. Now, we don't have free will in the phenomenal world, but possibly we have it in the noumenal world. We don't know. In order for us to have this moral life, Kant says it's rational for us to posit the existence of free will in the nominal world, in the noumenal world, not the nominal world, the noumenal world, in the world as it actually exists. So we postulate that it exists in the noumenal world, and then we can go from there and start to reason to some of the laws of freedom, the things that are implied by the existence of freedom in the noumenal world. One thing, by the way, right off the bat, to dispel a confusion that you might have, when he says we're free in the noumenal world, what he doesn't mean is we're free to do whatever we feel like doing. So the desires that you have are desires that exist in the phenomenal world. These are the things that exist in the world as you perceive it. So you're free in the noumenal world, not in the phenomenal world. So the freedom that you would have in the noumenal world, he says, is the freedom to follow only the laws that you prescribe yourself, or the laws that you allow other people to prescribe for you. Like the laws, basically, you're not beholden to anybody else. You can accept other people's laws, but it's up to you. You're not, in other words, subject to the arbitrary will of others. One thing that's neat about this is that it postulates, since this is going to be the locus of his theory of justice. So this is one way in which we are all going to be equal. So for Kant, this allows us to have some kind of egalitarianism here, if you're into egalitarianism. Like for Aristotle, it all revolved around, and for Plato especially, it all revolved around merit. It was all about, the people who had the ability ruled, and the people who didn't have the ability were just, workers. But for Kant, justice all happens equally because we all are equally free in the noumenal sense. We might all have different desires, we might all be different in the phenomenal realm, but in the noumenal realm, we all have an equal freedom. Now, couple that with the assumption that every human being is rational, and Kant says you can derive what he calls the categorical imperative. So the categorical imperative is categorical in that it applies to everything, imperative in that it is, like imperative that you do it, it is a command that you do. And the categorical imperative is this: act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. In other words, it's something that it sounds like the golden rule. It's not quite the golden rule because it applies to maxims instead of, there's reasons why it's not quite the golden rule, but it is his highest, this is the moral law, you follow it, and everything else revolves around this thing. And it's derived, he believes, because we are free and because we are rational. This is, and so what it makes it then is that all morality is a case of rationality. If you are immoral, then you are acting irrationally. By the way, I don't know if maxims are just like rules. So act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. What he really wants you to do is every time you're going to do something, stop, make it a maxim. Like, so let's say you wanted to rob somebody. Stop and say, I'm going to rob this person. Turn that into a maxim. Whenever I'm in this situation, rob somebody. Now make it into a universal law. For all people, when they're in this situation, rob someone. Could you will that to be the case? Could you will that people would always do that? If so, then go ahead, that is legit. If not, then you are going against the categorical imperative. You should never do that. Now, as applied to maxims, this is an ethical theory, but as applied to actions, as insofar as it limits the actions that you can do, this is a juridical theory. So that's where we get into his theory of justice. It places limits on which actions you can or cannot do. Doesn't place limits on your intentions or objectives. He didn't believe that you could legislate intentions. That doesn't mean that, like, so for example, you can have restrictions on, like premeditated murder, right? You can say that premeditated murder, that's an intention that you can say that you can't act with that intention, but you can't legislate like you must always act with this intention. So you can't command an intention, even though you can say that certain intentions are wrong. You can't act in those certain intentions. Now, from the categorical imperative, Kant's got all kinds of like wacky rules. So from the categorical imperative, he goes to the he believes that he deduces directly from that the universal principle of right. Any action is right if it can coexist with everyone's freedom in accordance with a universal law. So again, this is all going to revolve around freedom, the respect for other people's freedoms. So an action is right. So remember, this is what makes it justice, is that we're focused on action. An action is right if it can coexist with everyone's freedom in accordance with a universal law. That's the categorical imperative part. Or if on its maxim, the freedom of choice of each can coexist with everyone's freedom in accordance with the universal law. Now, what's interesting about this is that he believes that this is a justification for the ability to use coercion in order to go and defend the freedoms of others. And why that's interesting is because it sounds at first like, isn't that sort of, it sounds counterintuitive, because once you use coercion, aren't you stopping people from using their freedom? The moment that you use coercion, you are necessarily curtailing freedom, it sounds like. So, for example, let's say I want to go and I want to rob a store. And I want to go take all of the chocolates from a store, let's say. And it's because I just have a big sweet tooth. And the only thing I've ever stolen, I didn't steal it, actually, no. A friend of mine stole it. I was in a store and I was going to buy a chocolate. This was when I was in middle school, and a friend of mine was like, don't buy that, don't buy that. And I was like, why? He said, just don't do it, don't do it. And then we walked out and my friend was like, got it, right? And I remember thinking, I was like, dude, I had the money. Why did we steal it? What was the point? You know, like we could have gotten in trouble for that, and I had the money and there was no point in stealing it. But yeah, I don't know if I ate it or not. I think I did. It just felt stupid. But let's say I was going to steal all your chocolates and you were going to use coercion in order to stop me. Isn't that a curtailment of my freedom? Doesn't that mean that I can't go out and do what I want to do? Well, remember that the freedom that we're interested in is not the freedom to do whatever you want. That is the phenomenal self. The desires that we're talking about are the phenomenal self. What we're interested in is the noumenal self. That's where the real freedom lies. And that freedom, remember, is the freedom to be able to give yourself the rules that you want, the freedom to follow the rules that you set, or the rules that you accept from other people. So it's not the freedom to do just whatever. It's the freedom to follow certain rules. So the use of coercion is not an antithetical to that. As long as you're not cut off from giving yourself your own laws, then you are still free. So when I initially started off this video and I said that is justice the respect for everyone's freedom, it might have sounded like, oh, that sounds like an attractive view. But nowadays, I think what we consider freedom is a big difference from what Kant would have been talking about. So it might not be as attractive as you initially thought. Given all that, for Kant, a just society is one where all the members of the society respect the freedom of the other ones by refraining from violations of their freedoms. Now, in order for this to happen, Kant believes that you have to be part of a commonwealth. So you can't do this alone. You couldn't be, let's say, a man on an island like that. Well, that's actually a different question. This would be more like you couldn't isolate yourself from everybody else and still live, around people. You have to be part of a commonwealth. It would be unjust for you not to do so, because only in a commonwealth could you actually live. Only a commonwealth would be able to justly use coercion in order to defend freedom. Though that doesn't mean that he was very much against a paternalistic state. So that's the only reason why you would have to be part of a commonwealth is because of this, because they're the only ones who can use coercion in order to defend freedom. But he doesn't think that a commonwealth should be able to dictate. He's very much about you being the giver of your own laws. Not necessarily that you had to give your own laws. Like, you can take the laws of other people and allow them to suggest laws or anything like that. But as long as you're not beholden to them, as long as they're not forcing their laws upon you, that's that's the freedom that we're talking about. So he's not for a paternalistic state that is, impeding you from your freedoms. He's just for a state that can defend your freedoms, and it would be unjust for you to use coercion, to take coercion into your own hands. So you have to be part of a commonwealth. Now let's talk a little bit about his theories of redistributive justice. So how far, or should we at all, redistribute wealth? He believes that we should redistribute wealth only insofar as we meet the needs of others. But that's the extent of it. So how is this all going to work? Remember, he believes in equality because of freedom. He believes that we are all equal because because all his justice, his theory of justice, all revolves around the fact that we are all free in the noumenal world, in the noumenal self. That means we should all be treated equally under the law. But to be treated equally under the law doesn't mean we have to have equal possessions. So, in fact, that would be being treated unequally under the law. Like if I have, let's say, some money and you have less money, I would be treated unequally if somebody took my money from me and gave it to you, right? They would be benefiting you and be taking it from me. So that would be being treated unequally. So it is commensurate with being treated equally with the law for us to have unequal possessions. However, it is not, Kant still sees that it is, in order for us to exercise our freedoms, we do have to have our basic needs met. So he thinks that we do need to redistribute wealth insofar as we meet those needs. And he says that it is justifiable because the wealthy owe their very existence to the state. Remember, in order for our freedoms to be defended, in order for the use of coercion to be just, you have to have the state. And so the wealthy wouldn't even be around if it weren't for the state. So it's justified for the state to require them to give taxes in order to meet the needs of the unwealthy. Now, corrective justice. What does he think about jail and stuff like that? Kant believes in a very precise and exacting balanced reciprocity. So he thinks that if you do something, you should be punished exactly the same way that you did the wrong. So an eye for an eye, exactly to that extent. If you punish too harshly, that is unjust. If you don't punish harshly enough, that is unjust. And the punish too harshly, like nowadays, we see that as unjust. And that seems like, obvious to us nowadays. You see like people that go to jail for long periods of time for really small offenses, and you think, no, that can't be right. You shouldn't have done that. But the other side of the coin, not being punished harshly enough, that's a little bit harder for us to see nowadays, we kind of think like, well, so what? Like not a big deal. But for Kant, imagine it this way. Imagine if you had somebody, let's say somebody was murdered in your family, and the murderer is going to get off with a very light sentence. Would you feel that that was just? No, you would feel that's unjust, right? No, this person should be punished in commensurate with the crime that was committed. So there is an injustice the other way as well. That's Kant's point. So yeah, for Kant, the balanced reciprocity is the name of the game both ways. So that's really it for Kant's theory of justice. If you have any questions, please hit me up in the comments. Otherwise, please don't forget to support this project in my Patreon page, link in the description. And don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, share, and I will see you guys in the next video. Adios.